Hi and welcome to EaseEndo. I'm Dr. Hani and today we will learn about line angles and point angles. By definition, line angle is a junction where two walls of cavity meet and point angle is a point where three walls of cavity meet. Now, naming them can be really scary and confusing and frustrating at times. So let's simplify it. So basically, naming these line angle and point angles are super easy once you know it. Line angle gets its name from the two walls which is forming that line angle. So let's say this is a facial wall and this is your mesial wall. So this particular line angle would be your mesiofacial line angle. Similarly, if we are to name this particular point angle, then it gets its name from the three walls which is forming this point. That is your mesial, facial and pulpal. So this point angle would be mesio-facio-pulpal point angle. Similarly, the rest of the line angles and point angles in your entire cavity gets the name. So if you're still confused, we can remember it in this way. It's a quick tip basically. So just imagine your room is your class 1 cavity but without the ceiling. So all the four corners on the floor is basically your point angles because it is formed by two walls and a floor. And similarly, where two walls are meeting or where a wall and a floor is meeting is basically your line angle. So if you are counting it, it's going to be 8 line angles and 4 point angle, which is what you will see in your class 1 cavity. Now let's move to class 2 cavity. In your class 2 cavity, you have 11 line angle and 6 point angles. So now before we begin, we always start with labeling the wall. So we have mesial wall, lingual wall and facial wall. The junction between the mesial and the facial is your mesiofacial line angle. Similarly, on the opposite side, you will have mesiolingual line angle. Now, the junction between your facial wall and the pulpal floor would be your faciopulpal line angle. Similarly, on the opposite side, the junction between your pulpal floor and lingual wall is going to be your linguopulpal line angle. Now, the junction between your mesial and pulpal floor would be your mesiopulpal line angle. Moving on to the class 2 part, the junction between your pulpal floor and the axial wall will be your axiopulpal line angle. And this line which is connecting your axial wall to the gingival seat would be your axiogingival line angle. Similarly, this junction, this line between your axial wall and the facial wall would be your axiofacial line angle, and on the opposite side, it will be your axiolingual line angle. The line that is connecting the facial wall to gingival seat would be your faciogingival line angle, and on the opposite side, you would have linguogingival line angle. So this is pretty much about the line angles. Now let's talk about point angles in your class 2 cavity, and there are total 6 point angles in your class 2 cavity. So as we see a point here, this point is formed by your mesial wall, facial wall and pulpal floor. Hence the name mesio-facio-pulpal point angle. Similarly, on the opposite side, a point is found by your mesial wall, pulpal floor and lingual wall. And this point angle is your mesiolinguopulpal point angle. Now, this particular point is found by your axial wall and your facial wall and the pulpal floor. That is your third wall. So, the name would be axio-facio-pulpal point angle. Similarly, on the opposite side, it would be linguo instead of facio. That would be your axio-linguo-pulpal point angle. Now, This particular point, which is formed by your axial wall, facial wall, and gingival seat, would be axiofacial-gingival. And on the opposite side, instead of facial, we would use axiolinguo-gingival point angle. So let's now learn about class 4, class 3, and class 5 briefly. In your class 4, there are 11 line angles and 6 point angles. Now it is very interesting to notice that it is just same as your class 2 cavity. Now, what is common is that the occlusal and the proximal portion is open in both class 4 and class 2 cavity, hence the same line angle and point angles. Now, let's talk about class 3. In your class 3, there are 6 line angles and 3 point angles. A easy way to basically understand how to calculate line angle and point angle is consider it as a triangular room, and it has got 3 sides. Now multiply 3 by 2, so that would give you your line angles, and then the corners of your triangular room would be your point angles. So we can hold the same concept for class 5 also. In your class 5, we have 8 line angles and 4 point angles. Now, this is very much similar to your class 1 cavity. Again, this is like an open room without the ceiling. So, it's like a square, has 4 sides into 2, that would make 8 line angles and your 4 point angles. The line angles and point angles of class 1 and class 2 cavity are very frequently asked in Viva, so emphasize more on that, and this is basically a summary of all the classes. Learning should be easy. If you like the video, please like, share and subscribe.